Hi, I'm John Grooters. I love actors. Actors make scripts sing and bring movies to life. But let's be honest, actors don't save lives. Well, meet Jake Boyce. He's a terrific actor who's found a new line of work. And now, literally, he saves lives. Today on No Shame.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of his name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid, no shame.
All right, so our guest today is Jake Boyce, actor turned first responder. So could there be a more appropriate guest on a podcast that claims to live at the intersection of faith and culture than you, Jake? You're the perfect guest.
Well, thanks for having me. A long-time listener, first-time caller, right? That's what they say. So.
Yeah, great. Well, it's first time to have you on the show. I want to set up to the No Shame audience a little bit of our history, Jake. And I'm sitting in the very space, and right behind me was where I was doing casting calls for my first feature film, The Frontier Boys. This is 10 years ago now. And The Frontier Boys was going to feature 4 high school-aged friends that were, the main characters of the story. And the funny character was the Jackson Carlson character. And the other casting had gone really, really well. And I really loved the casting that we ended up finding for the other 3 boys. But I was just not happy with anybody that was going to come in and play this role of Jackson, a role that I really liked. You remember that day? You were auditioning on, where were you?
I do. I was actually in this house. I was at home, nervous. I was trying to memorize all the lines so I didn't have to use any cue cards. And I was rolling through audition preview with my dad and yelling at him for giving me remarks and, basically, what do you know kind of stuff. And
Your dad was coaching you?
He was trying to. I wasn't, I was younger and more naive and less open to criticism back then. But I was very nervous, but I was ready to go. I knew, I had a couple ideas in mind of stuff that would hopefully help me stand out a little bit from maybe some of the other people you were seeing.
Well, I've said before, and I believe it's true, that directing is 90% casting, and I think I do my hardest work in trying to do the hard work. It's hard. Casting is hard. It's no fun either because, it's so hard for the actors because, you're going to have to go through all this work, and 99% of the time you don't get the job. But it's not so easy for the director either because I kind of like I instantly like people. I want to hire virtually everybody who comes in for an interview, which is terrible as a business leader. But and there's so many talented people who are so good at so many things, and you're trying to find the perfect combination of talent for a scene or for a movie. And it's not just the talent, but it's how do they differentiate themselves from the other talent in the room. You've kind of helped me in the casting agents world since we did Frontier Boys. You've also been as an auditioning actor. What's the audition process like for you?
Well, when I first started, it was a lot of getting used to dealing with rejection because, like you said, bare minimum, 9 out of 10 jobs you go for, you don't get. And it's an interesting take being on both sides of it because it's very hard dealing with rejection when you first start and when you get it so often. But the other side of it, too, is having to reject is not any easier, especially when you like a lot of people and everyone would be good for a certain role, maybe just not that role that you had in mind. And having to tell people, I'm sorry, we're not going with you is every bit as difficult as hearing that you're not being gone with. So yeah, it's an interesting take seeing it from both sides for sure.
So I just think that when you see a finished film and you see the actors on the screen, it's impossible to know who didn't get those parts and if that would have been a better or a worse chemistry. When it does go right, I remember going up to Beverly Holloway after I saw the movie I Can Only Imagine. And she, I can't even think of the guy's name right now, but she cast the lead, who was the lead singer for the band, and had sang the hit song I Can Only Imagine from Mercy Me. And the actor was so good. And he was a voice talent who apparently had been on Broadway singing in Les Mis, singing the Jean Valjean part. and he had a voice. It's pretty hard to have a voice as good as the lead singer of Mercy Me, and she found a character who could act, and he sang his own songs in that movie. It was his voice, and
Right.
so I went up to Beverly Holloway and said, it's not often that a casting director kind of steals the thunder for the show, but you kind of overshadowed everybody in this movie by your casting. Anyway, she got a chuckle out of that. She's a great casting agent. But I remember the day I'm sitting here, and you kind of came on. I had 5 interviews scheduled for that day for the Jackson Carlson character. And I just wanted somebody that naturally made me laugh. That's just so important. And what we love about movies is things that when we laugh. And you have laughed at movies your whole life. You've been a fan of different actors. Who are some of those actors, even growing up, that just cracked you up, that you loved?
One of my favorite ones, and I impersonated him in the audition for Frontier Boys, was Chris Farley and the Saturday Night Live kind of style of comedy back when it was him and Adam Sandler and Will Ferrell and stuff, and before it got into what it's become today. But it was what I tried to do, in what my favorite actors have done, is shown physicality. Physicality in comedy is a thing, at least, that makes me laugh, and when people are funny with not just what their words are, but with their bodies and how they move in a scene and stuff. And that was hard to do because back then it was Skype and you had a narrow foot on each direction window to stay in screen and stay on frame, but to be able to exude physicality with your voice and with as much body movement as you can get away with without being off frame, that was important. And Chris Farley embodied that his whole career. That's what made him so clever.
When you're casting, and you're right, 10, 12 years ago, it was fairly novel to do casting over digital. It was Frontier Boys was the first major project that I didn't sit in the same room with all the auditions. But I did learn pretty quick to see some advantages of it. One is that in a casting room, if I'm sitting 15 feet away from you and I can see your physical movements pretty well, but so many times in a film, the camera's quite close. And what a person does subtly is often lost in a live interview. No matter how much you're trying to pay attention to it, you tend to project your voice, because like I'm doing now, but in a movie, it's the little, you know what I'm saying? It's the little things.
Subtleties.
And the close-up shot sometimes reveals those things. I also usually, if I think the audition is going well, I will ask the person, all right, go stand in that doorway back there and now do the scene again. And like sometimes I didn't know they were 450 pounds. How could I know that from their face shot? Or I didn't know they had one leg, whatever, which might be fine. I'm not saying you wouldn't cast those people, but you don't see the whole person. And so we would mix that up. I also like I think I threw you off script a little bit and we did some ad libs. Do you remember how that went?
I do remember doing them. I'm not 100% certain. I think, a lot of it was facial expression stuff too. You cued me on some different facial expression stuff. And I think that's a little bit feeds into what you were saying about, facial expressions and subtlety of that kind of humor, especially when the camera's close and you don't have your body to work with. It's all got to come from your face and from your mouth. But I can't remember exactly what we did, but I do remember, hearing some pretty wild, you're in the woods with your grandmother who has just fallen down and all of a sudden you see something beautiful, so you leave her and go look at it. And it's like, show me what that looks like. I'm like, oh, that is interesting.
I know. You were fun, and I remember asking you to do, let's say Dick Vitale was calling the Looney Tunes Final Four. I don't know. But I know by the end of that audition, I mean, I was laughing, you were relaxed. And I think I canceled the rest of the auditions that day and said to them, hey, we really found the final piece for the puzzle. And, we went on and shot that movie in northern Michigan in the winter. And in the process, you came in, you'd been studying acting in Chicago. You were very professional in your approach. You always had your script marked up and knew your lines. And you were even working with some of the actors. Turned out, in one of the great acts of nepotism of all time, I cast my son Jed in the movie, and you guys met each other. Do you remember what that was like?
Yeah, I remember Jed was the very first one I met. I got into town, into Holland from Chicago, about a 3-hour drive, and we met for dinner and kind of introduced everyone. And I believe it was you and Judy, one of the producers, and I got to meet Jed, who was my age. We were 6 weeks apart age-wise, and I got to meet, he's this guy's going to be acting alongside of me for the next couple months, and I got to learn a little bit about who would become one of my best friends on the planet.
Well, So I'm just having a chance to reminisce with y'all. And if you're listening to the podcast, I'm talking to Jake Boyce, actor turned first responder, and we're going to get on that as well. But I wanted to bring you up to speed that we met on a virtual casting session 10 years ago, and he brought a comedic sense that I really appreciated. And then we got into filming Frontier Boys, and in the process, we found out that you were on set, you had a lot of fun, but we also had some chance to just even kind of craft some of the scenes sitting around my dining room table and just laughing at some stuff that you were coming up with that made its way in the screenplay. You remember any of that?
Yeah, I believe some of it was the wearing my mother's roller skates because they were comfortable. I think that came up in that brainstorming session. There's a scene where I mentioned that I may or may not use my mother's roller skates because we were going to a roller skating party, I think, that night. And I thought, we were brainstorming, maybe it'd be funny if I brought up the fact that, they're my mother's skates, and there was maybe a rebound retort of, you wear your mother's skates.
Right.
And just a little line, I think the audio is fading. It's the very end of the scene as we walk out of frame. It's kind of like, well, they fit me.
They fit me.
And then just stuff.
You remember we were laughing. You had a pickup line about what you would say to a girl you were trying to pick up about her eyes. How did that go?
I remember. I believe it was when I look at you, I feel my eyes burning.
Yes.
And it's still one of my favorites to this day. I think
it still works, huh?
Yeah.
Well, you tried it on one of the girls from the band Super Chick in the movie as she comes by on her motorcycle or something, and it bombs horribly bad for the character Jackson Carlson, and really fun moment in the film as you're walking away. You're such an idiot.
Yeah, bombs in the film, but films aren't real, and in real life it works great, so I'd recommend it to anyone.
When I look at you, I feel my eyes burning. My wife's eyes are burning today. I think she swam in a lake and got some kind of bacterial infection or something. So it didn't work for me this morning because it was literally true that her eyes were in fact burning.
Well, she'll get added to the COVID count probably at that point.
So yeah, no kidding. So let's switch over. So you were an actor. It's not easy to make a living as an actor. And fortunately, you had some training and something to fall back on. So what's your second career all about?
So I, before I got into acting in high school, I wanted to be a first responder, firefighter, and paramedic. And I did a little bit of training for it. I got certified, worked for a couple months on a local fire department before starting college. And in college I took an acting class that kind of drew me away from that, so it was a sudden abrupt stop. I trained for about a year and a half for it right out of high school, and then kind of fell in love with acting and got away from it for a couple years, and then like you said, it's tough to make a living as an actor, and I always had this passion that I wanted to serve my community. I wanted to serve God with what he gave me, and what did that look like? So I pondered on it for quite a bit of time, and I didn't feel the calling to do some of the amazing things that people do, like go, missionary work and that kind of stuff. But what I did feel that I could serve both God and my community with was providing care to others. And what that looked like for me was going back and being recertified, sitting through the same classes because I didn't keep up with any of the continuing education, and because in my mind, I was going to be Hollywood's next big star, and I didn't need to do the continuing education. But I went back through class, got recertified, fire academy and paramedic, and have been working for the last 6 years doing that now.
So that was people may not realize specifically how much medical training. I would have said, oh yeah, Jake's a fireman. But you're not just a fireman. Tell me the difference between just a fireman and what you are and what you've had to go through.
So the fire academy is actually the easier side. The paramedic side, the medical training to get your medical license as a paramedic is 6 months of EMT school, which is the license, the step below. And that's just basic life support, CPR, learning how to read vitals and learning how to look at trends in patients and stuff. And then when you get into paramedic, that's the advanced life support skills. So starting IVs and intubating people, putting tubes down their throats so they can breathe, and administering medications and making judgment calls in the field based on conditions, based on what medication you want to give, electricity, so cardiac monitor, shocking people back into rhythm, or cardioverting, and it's just a vast, big difference from EMT up to paramedic, and it's about a year and a half worth of schooling on top of 1,200 clinical hours in the hospital in different specialties. So I spent hours doing OBGYN, and then I went to do surgery, and then I did emergency room, then I did the diabetes clinic, and it's just there had to be 30 or 40 different specialty rotations I had to do, and then ride time. And then I had to be paired up with a local fire department and do field ride time and hit a certain amount of things. I had to do a certain amount of IVs. I had to, see a certain amount of cardiac arrests and that kind of stuff. So it's a long process. It's about almost 3 years to get fully certified and ready to go.
Well, because I've had a chance to kind of walk a little bit of this journey alongside you, and you've kind of kept me up to date, I've been amazed at, on one hand, you're willing to run into a literally burning building. I mean, literally burning with fire, the firemen work. And on the other hand, you've got people in the back of an ambulance and you're literally saving their lives. And I know what the word literally means. It's usually not used literally. But tell me, you've run into burning buildings and saved people's lives in the back of ambulances. Am I right?
I have, yeah. The fire stuff doesn't happen as much. I would say 95% of the job is the ambulance side, the emergency medical response. But yeah, I've had the opportunity to save some lives. I've unfortunately lost some, which is another challenge of the job, is learning how to deal with that and not just bury it or forget about it, but a little bit of everything.
So we're talking with Jake Boyce, actor turned first responder, and Jake's from Chicago. I'm in Michigan, and so we're not so far apart, but your metropolitan area, Chicago, is as real life of an incubator that there could be for the work that you do. I mean, you see everything there. You say you've seen, you've got to become aware that life is mortal, that we're fragile, because you see people's lives end way more often than the rest of us. How do you deal with that?
It's a challenge, definitely. It's something that you have to learn to have a good support system on. It's something that you have to rely heavily, I believe, on faith to get you through, because there's a balance there where if you get too comfortable in it and see it too much and don't actively deal with it and talk about it and rely on God, you can become calloused to death, which is also not a good thing. And it not only dulls your skills, but it also dulls the way you interact with people and how you see the world. And that can be dangerous for sure. And there's a high burnout rate in this career. I've seen a lot of guys, good friends, that just couldn't do it because they've had a couple bad calls in a row. They run into a stretch where they've had a couple 2-year-olds die on them, in the back of the ambulance, and then they just can't handle that, or they see some horrible stuff being pulled out of a fire that it just breaks them. And nothing to be ashamed about. It's a very difficult balance to adjust to, and it's something that I have to constantly do. It's not something that I've mastered anywhere close to. It's something that I pray about all the time. It's something that I rely on God and family and friends to kind of help lift up. And there's been plenty of times, and you're aware of this, plenty of times where I've had such a bad couple weeks, I just come out and get on the golf course and dive into the Bible a little bit and kind of get away from it all, which you have to do sometimes.
When we started doing these podcasts, intersection of faith and culture, we kind of were using the word culture in lieu of biographies, authors, actors, directors, and so you've had a foot in the world, which is really the world I live in, where we're trying to sort of maybe help persuade or entertain people. I remember you coming in one weekend, and then I was trying to, I had a hard day. I mean, my thumb is a little sore. I've been working the mouse on the editor all day, and I might have to get those glasses to take the... What'd you do this weekend? You go, well, I rappelled off a bridge into a burning car and took the jaws of life and pulled a woman out. I mean, unbelievable stuff you do, man. I mean, what is up with that?
Yeah, it's, something like that. It's crazy stuff. You'd be hard-pressed to find something I haven't seen as far as crazy stuff, but... It's fun. It's challenging, but it's something I enjoy doing. So it's not something I dread. Obviously, everyone deals with different struggles in different ways. So my job is not any more difficult than the next. It's just the way you cope with it and the way you progress through life, learning how to deal with what you see, because there's a lot of people out there. It doesn't matter if you work a desk job or a 9 to 5, on your feet job, or fireman or policeman, or every job has its struggles, every job has its stress. It's just, I believe, the community you have around there and what's inside that community that really helps you move forward.
So what's your schedule like? What's the life of a paramedic, fireman like? What's your job hours?
So I'm on what's called 24/48. So I work 24 hours on, and then I have 48 hours off. So I will go to work, let's say on a Monday morning at 7 a.m., and I will get off work at Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. So then I will have Tuesday and Wednesday off, and then I am due back at work on Thursday at 7 a.m. So that's a revolving 24 on, 48 off. So I work a third of the year, every third day.
How's that work out for you? Can you stay awake for 24 hours?
Well, we don't have to usually. We it's kind of like our second home. So we cook there, we eat there, we clean. We have chores. We have little bunks that we sleep in. Hopefully, not very often recently.
Oh, okay.
For the last 6 months, it's been pretty busy. But usually, if depending on what calls come in, we may be able to grab a couple hours of sleep and maybe a couple Cubs games when they're on. But it seems like more often than not, the second you sit down with hot food around the kitchen table, the tones go off and you're out the door.
Did you get to slide down the pole?
We don't have poles. That's old.
Oh.
That's old inner, downtown Chicago, old, where there's way less space. Out in the suburbs, we have more space, so they build normal buildings.
Couldn't you run up a flight of stairs and then come down the pole? That would be sort of cool, wouldn't it?
I've petitioned to have poles put in, and they're not necessarily wanting to spend the money on that. So, but that's why I'm not the boss.
Where's the drama? So I've called you a few times because I don't know who to listen to over the last 5 months about the COVID-19. I'm not trying to be skeptical. I mean, I got a mask here if I need to wear it. But I didn't know anybody better to talk to, Jake, than you, because, you're not spinning an agenda. You're working in the field. You're going to see, I think, if this pandemic is killing people, is touching people, if it's a hoax. I mean, if you want to find out what a first responder's life has been like over the last 6 months in Chicago, of all places. So, I mean, again, I don't want you to have to, I'm not, of course, wanting you to say anything that would put your job in jeopardy or anybody's privacy in jeopardy, nothing like that. But what can you tell us from your firsthand personal observation that you've seen related to this COVID-19?
Sure. I'll take you on a little timeline here, because it's definitely changed perspective and thought process on it. I will say when this first started, it was so new and no one knew anything about it. I mean, no one, the federal government, the state and local governments, any of the first responders, any of the normal citizens. I think the lack of knowledge started a little bit of a panic up front, which put us on a not great trajectory. I think that this virus is real. I think that this virus can be very deadly in certain populations and people with pre-existing health conditions. I will say, and I'm not going to take a super strong political stance, but I will say that I would encourage people and the listeners here to read your news instead of watch your news. I think that's been a big problem. I think that if you spend your days in quarantine at home watching the news and listening to the news media give their take on what's going on, you're going to be skewed on what's actually happening out there. Now, that's not saying I haven't seen serious cases. That's not saying I have seen all serious cases. It's a mix. But I'm a big believer in loving one another and not resorting to what we've been doing. And I think a big thing that's been going on right now is a lot of stone throwing. I think a lot of people are very quick to cast a stone at anyone that differs from their opinion. It's okay to be nervous about this virus. It's okay to be scared about it. It's okay to wear a mask when you're alone in your car. I personally don't think that's necessary. I don't. But if me wearing a mask in public makes someone else feel safe, regardless if I think I need to or not, that's fine. And I'll listen to, what the orders are. I do believe that this virus is a little bit overblown on the scale from the media. So that being said, does a normal 25-year-old man that is just going out and about his day have to worry about getting this and dying? No. But a 70-year-old that has, respiratory issues and COPD and stuff is going to be more at risk. But then again, that is also the case with any respiratory virus. And this is not the first respiratory virus we've seen. I can tell you in the last 6 months, I have done well over 100 to 200 cases of COVID-19, transporting people with it, exposed face-to-face with it. Sometimes, most of the times with the proper PPE equipment, personal protective equipment, sometimes not. When you're having to do other work, stuff can get knocked off. I've never tested positive, but I would just ask people to just respect one another, love one another. We're all going through this together, right? I mean, you guys out in Michigan have a little bit different governor than we do, but they're both on the same path of what they're trying to accomplish. And I think that this has turned more of a publicity stunt than it is actually trying to work through this virus. Again, it's real, but...
So one thing I want to ask you about, because whether we read our news or watch our news, the basis of a lot of the discussion, the basis of a lot of the decisions, the policy making, the quote-unquote executive orders are statistics. It's like, okay, we're going to have there's this many deaths, it's gone up this many times, there's this. We hear statistics all the time. And I don't know when I'm hearing true statistics, if ever. So do you think that these COVID-related deaths that are being reported by the hospital are all or most or some people who are dying because of the COVID virus, and what have you seen?
So I'll tell you a couple stories that'll kind of blow your mind. And this isn't necessarily, I'm not stating this is the norm. I'm not stating this is this happens every single place. But I have a friend, I won't name her name, that was not feeling well. This was about 6 to 8 weeks ago. So she went to one of the drive-through testing sites out here to get tested. And so she had to go online and register for a time, I think, between noon and 2 p.m., show up, and she had to give her name and info and all that. So she gets there, and there's about a line of 400 to 500 cars, just an insane amount of cars. She had to work that night, and she got a little bit frustrated and said, you know what, forget this, I'm leaving. So she drove off. She got a letter in the mail 3 weeks later saying that she tested positive. So that is, and that's a good friend of mine, a personal friend of mine, and I've seen the letter myself. So, I didn't see her drive out, but so that's one of the things. We transported a guy who got hit on his motorcycle, and was unfortunately passed away. He got T-boned. The man on the motorcycle died. And he tested positive in the autopsy for COVID-19 and was added to the COVID-19 death toll. So it is inflated, definitely. I mean, there's definitely people that, but what they're doing, and even what some of these public health officials have admitted to, including the ones in the White House, that a lot of the times that, they don't have the resources, any hospital, to autopsy and test every single person that passes away. There's so many people every day that pass away in the United States. So if they had a positive COVID test anytime before they died, and were not being, having an autopsy performed on them, they were counted towards the death toll. So the death toll is definitely inflated. I will tell you this, the cases are way underreported as well. A lot more people have had this. And now that they're starting to come out with more frequent antibody testing, you'll see that, in this area, for example, where they think 10,000 people have had it, 40,000 people have had it. So I think you're going to see more cases, and you're going to see influx. We're seeing it at work. So I've had a lull at work recently, where our COVID-19 transports have gone down significantly. I was doing 20 to 30 a week. I'm doing maybe 10 a month now, and it's going to rise back up though. And that's what these lockdowns have done. This virus is much like influenza, unless you eradicate it off the planet, it's still there. So regardless when you open the doors or not, it's going to be there. People are going to get sick. I think that you let the healthy people out, and unfortunately you just got to trust people as adults to make their own decisions, and just like you do every year in influenza season. Because if they're talking about this being an every year thing, I don't know if our economy can survive shutting down for 6 months every year. That might be rough.
So this is Jake Boyce on the No Shame podcast. And again, this is a first responder. There's a lot of signs. There's a lot of appreciation. The first responders are heroes, and rightly so, Jake. And I speak for everybody I know that says, man, we appreciate, especially those of you who kind of bring your faith into the workplace and save lives and are responsible. Your partners in crime, the fire department and the police department work together all the time, right? You guys are often, and there's always a little rivalry. The two softball teams are going to go at each other, and far be it from me to ask a fireman to say anything nice about a policeman. But the police don't quite have the same love going for them these days. Have you noticed this?
I have. I've seen it, and it's a shame. I mean, it's another thing that's just been blown up by what you're watching on TV. I mean, we have a good rivalry, like you said, firemen and policemen. We usually like the saying that, policemen are just guys that failed the fire academy. But in all reality, they're very well trained. They're very hardworking people. They serve their community every bit that we do, and a lot of times more, because there's multiple calls where, whether it's a domestic violence or an active shooter, where the police are going in and making the scene safe before we even get there. We do what's called staging. We'll sit down the road and wait for the police to radio in, then it's safe for us to come in. So they're definitely doing the Lord's work. They're definitely in the middle of it right now. And they're absolutely bad apples. Some of the video we watched that sparked this whole thing was outrageous. It was uncalled for. It was sinful and deceitful and terrible. But that's a bad apple in the mix of a lot of good apples. And this is far from the first time we've seen this. I wasn't alive for it, I don't think, but back in Los Angeles, I think it was at the early 90s, late 80s, something like that. And even in the 50s and 60s too. There's been, seems like every couple decades we get into this police are bad regime, and what they're proposing now with defund the police and stuff. I've talked to a lot of officers about this, and if someone's breaking in your house with a gun, and you call 911, you're going to get one of two options with defund the police. You're either going to get a wait time of a couple days for someone to show up and help, or you're going to have a social worker show up. And social workers are great. They do a lot of good work, but not necessarily the profession I want showing up if someone's breaking in my house with a gun. So I think we need to kind of slow down on the defund the police movement and maybe figure out what it actually means, because everything I've heard from people in the streets, because I've been in the middle of some of these riots now, we've been called to scenes where there's fire started or people hurt. I've tended to protesters during the protest, and what they seem to say, a common theme, is that the police aren't trained well enough, so they don't know when to use their guns, they don't know when to shoot or to stop, and they need to be better trained. So really and I tell them, really what you mean by defund the police is fund the police. More funding for training, and I'm all for that. If there's a higher rate of misuse of power in the police department, then we need more training so they're more apt to handle the situation, and that would require more funding, not less.
On a personal level, I mean, I think, when you put on the uniform, or even when you put on the fire uniform, there's a certain swagger maybe that but these are human beings, and the signage right now, even in the peaceful protests, is all F the police, F the police. It's being spray painted on the walls. People are signing, carrying this F the police. I won't say the word right now. But when you've talked to these guys, and I don't want to make this sound like they're all marshmallow softy feelies, or women or men, but what does it feel like? I mean, what if that signage was around whatever job you have? F the truck drivers, F school teachers, F whatever you do, and people are screaming at the top of their lungs. I mean, have you talked to these guys about this? I mean, what's that?
Yeah, I mean, not in depth, but I do a little bit. I have a theory on this. I have a thought process that, it's okay to have an emotional reaction to something that you disagree with. That's part of our First Amendment rights as Americans, is to have the right to free speech. Not all free speech is good speech. But that's what it's awarded to us in the Constitution. I'm a big believer in defending the Constitution and the rights of Americans, so I am 100% okay with peaceful protests. Whether I agree with the mission or not, or the statement or not, I am 100% with your right to do that. That being said, the people that take those protests and go a step further, and then that turns into rioting, and that turns into political missions that are funded by people that are actively trying to have this happen is a terrible thing. So these people that are saying F the police, these people that are saying defund the police and that police are murderers and stuff, either haven't needed police service that actually shows up when they need it, with a scary situation, because people don't understand. They think that police are just riding around in cars looking to write tickets and pull over black men for no reason. That's not the case. And are there some people like that? Maybe. There's firemen like that. There's racist firemen out there. There's racist grocery store clerks. There's racist bankers. There's racist everything. And I think that to say that we're systemically racist as a country is just beyond wrong. I've seen so many good people. I've worked with so many good police officers that took an oath to give their life to protect their community. When you call 911 when someone's shooting a gun and those police show up, they're not there to fire guns in the air and handcuff black men to poles. They're there to draw the gunfire towards them and away from the community. So it's kind of heartbreaking a little bit to see these heroes that, and I would never say this to their face that they're heroes, but, to see them be kind of dragged through the mud a little bit over the actions of one bad apple spoiling the bunch is really a shame.
So again, we're talking with Jake Boyce, Jake has said, you've pulled hundreds of people who've had COVID-19. You've had to put on layers and layers of personal protective device in hot weather. I mean, that's not probably comfortable, even just to suit up, is it, or convenient? No,
it's just seals in every single ounce of sweat. You're soaking wet after this thing. We started off with, when we didn't know much about this virus, we started off with full zip up, what's called Tyvek suits. They're kind of hazmat looking white suits, paper thin, but they're a material that just is super hot. And big respirator masks, like the ones you would use to paint that filter out small particles, and a little hood, and eyewear, protective wear, and then a big face shield. And we sweat. You're in the back of a metal box in the ambulance, so that's not helpful either. And the thing fogs up, so you can't see what you're doing. So sometimes you just have to lose some of the protective equipment so you can see what you're doing and start an IV, and that technically would expose you to it. And but yeah, it's very uncomfortable. I've always said and God has all credit for the beautiful creation of the earth. What man has credit for a little bit is the invention of central air conditioning, which I think is very important.
I wrote a worship song about that.
I'll tell you, I've learned to appreciate central air conditioning more than anything on the planet right now because of how hot it's been this summer and putting on that gear.
You can shut my water off before you take the AC in the summertime. You're right.
Yeah, I've been a little insensitive to it sometimes. I've put it where I've pulled off all my protective gear at some points and say, you know what, if I'm going to get this thing, I'm dying of sweat here. So, but yeah, it's an interesting thing to get used to for sure, wearing all that extra stuff.
Now, another thing I don't think people think about with you paramedics who answer the call, and Jake, you're a young guy. You're in your early 30s, and you're a strong guy. You're a physically strong guy. And you've told me a number of times where things have gotten physical in that ambulance. Tell us a story like that, or tell me what the reality is.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely can, depending on the call. I mean, I've had multiple times where people that were high on drugs and stuff decided that they wanted to fist fight you and didn't want to go to the hospital or be arrested, and it can definitely turn physical back there. Where we've had people where they fought us even when we're in these hazmat suits and Tyvek suits for COVID that are ripping open our suits and stuff, trying to get out. That's part of it, because you got to balance protecting yourself, but also your obligation and the oath you took is to protect that patient. So you can't necessarily trade fisticuffs with them, but to be able to protect them safely, from keeping them from jumping out of the ambulance, keeping them from attacking you. There's a lot of stuff that can be used as weapons in the back of an ambulance for sure. So
they've come at you with those things, right?
They have, yeah. I've had an oxygen tank picked up and waved at me and swung at me. I've had needles and stuff picking up and trying to been stabbed, which is not only scary, but it's also a big, there's tons of people with definitely bloodborne diseases that can be transferred via that. And it doesn't make me love the job any less. It's definitely interesting. It's definitely a cool story to tell afterwards, but in the middle of it, it's very frustrating.
So I want to ask you about, and this is I how does your faith, how does your view of who God is, who you are in God's love and in his creation and what he's called you to do, I mean, how do you integrate that into the culture of the fire department, into the culture of the paramedic department, into the calls you go on? Is it top of mind, bottom of mind? Does it influence you in a general way, a specific way? Is prayer part of the journey for you? How does this play out for you? Because I know you're a man of faith.
Yeah, it's very much, it's got to be front of your mind, especially with the stuff you see, especially with the stuff that's going on in the world right now. Because a lot of times you'll question, why am I doing this? I can make every bit as much, if not more money doing something else. And the stress that comes along with it, but you pray about it, and you have to rely on the fact that this is what God's called me to do. I'm here for a reason. If I could take the easy way out, but that wouldn't be following God's plan. And what I learned early on with this, and it's helped me deal with a lot of the stress of this, is to stop relying on my own schedule and my own plan and start relying on God for his plan. It keeps you focused. It keeps you, kind of zoned into what's going on, because without faith, I don't know how some of these guys, and I know a lot of them, even guys I work with that do this job without faith and without a belief in God, and I don't know how they do it.
Have you ever been on the job either in a fire situation or where the danger was very real? Have you ever been scared in the moment?
Yeah, there's been a couple times where I've, thought this is it for sure. This is where I die, and it's. I would be lying if I said I wasn't scared in the moment. But it wasn't an overwhelming, body shaking, scared experience. Part of it was a little bit like, if this is what we're doing, I'm not going to run away. This is what I'm called to do, and you kind of just talk to God. It's you don't necessarily have time to bend a knee and bow your head and pray in those situations, but you're definitely having a conversation with God in your head, saying, God, you called me to do this. You told me to ask you for anything. I'm asking you to keep me safe, and let me work through you and with you, and that's what you got to do. I mean, the situations that we're get put in sometimes, and it's not like that all the time, but there's definitely situations, dangerous situations that you can go into, police and fire, where there's a good chance you may not make it out. But if you have that sense of calm, that armor of God that you go into every call with and that you rely on, that's the only way to do this job.
You guys are the ones, a lot of us remember 9/11 as kind of the penultimate example, or maybe the ultimate example, I should say, of who was running away and who was running toward the danger. And all of us would be running away, but the firemen and the policemen were the ones running towards those buildings as they were collapsing, trying to save as many lives as they could. You guys really, even the guys who aren't marching to a recognized sense of faith in God, you are acting counterculturally to love and serve people that you don't even know in your profession. And, it's stunningly admirable, man. It's really admirable, and you see it every day.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah, I love doing it. I couldn't do it without the support of people like you and my family, and definitely without God. But it's something that is ever evolving, something that I'll continue to do as long as God allows me to do it. And I'd love to try a different scenario. I've been talking to coming out to Michigan to see how it is out there. It's probably a little bit different than Chicago, but definitely interesting. I've talked to a lot of people that you've set me up with out there that do the same job, and interesting to see different stories and talk about different believers that share the same kind of experience and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun.
Well, so let's be real. We're going to go back to where we started this podcast. I mean, sure, now you're saving lives and, fighting with people in the ambulance and running into fires. But before that, you were an actor.
Yeah.
And really, the people we listen to the most in this world for advice and for political opinions and for truth are actors. So what's a more important job? No, don't answer that. But I want to go back to after we finished The Frontier Boys, which was this, again, my first feature film. Jake was an actor in the film. We finished the cut, we finished the color, we finished the sound design. We hadn't released the film yet, but we were entered in a few film festivals. And one of the very first audiences that we were going to be able to gauge how they accepted or didn't accept the film was a once every 4-year festival called the Saboth International Film Festival in Milan, Italy. And I thought, how cool would it be to go to Milan, Italy for the first, in one hand, and it would be cool if other people went. And so, Jake, you came, and our director of photography, Brian Papirski, came. And so we got to go to this great city where there's a wonderful film festival. Our film was slotted for, I think, a Friday night. It was a prime spot. The theater was packed. It was subtitled in Italian, which made it a little interesting. Yeah. But you remember that night and the reaction to the film we got that night?
I do, like it was yesterday. Yeah, it was amazing to see how well everyone reacted to it. Reading it through dubs, to watch them watch it and have to read the words and react differently as opposed to just watching it like we normally do here. But to see they were right on cue with the reactions we wanted them to have, and were so receptive and so loving. It was such a cool experience. One of my favorite nights I've ever had out there, and being able to be a part of that and learn that culture. The trip in general was fantastic. Mastering the Italian language,
it didn't take long.
It did so easily. That was
it just came to you. It just came to you like the back of your head.
Yeah,
there was a bunch of young cadets that night. Remember in the back couple of rows, people that were training for the police academy were there. About 30 or 40 of them. That was interesting, and they were great. That
got me a little bit of a taste for the high life, so to speak. People wanted to talk to us afterwards and ask us questions, and we did a Q&A. I'm like, they want to hear from me? Like, I'm just a kid from Chicago that made a cool film, but that was very interesting to me to be able to share our stories and to share with these kids what this movie was like and making it and all that is truly a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that was fun, and it is a surreal life, and now 10 years later, you really do have a lot to share with people, and they should be lining up and asking you for your autograph. As much as I loved your performance, and I think you had every bit of talent that anyone in Hollywood can take, and we've both laughed a lot at some of the same comedic actors. You actually deserve to be interviewed now as a first responder and as a lifesaver, even more than as an entertainer. Although I hope your days of acting aren't 100% over, because it's like falling off a bike. You can do it again.
I know it, and unfortunately, the fire paramedic life doesn't necessarily keep you in diamonds and furs. Not that acting ever did for me, but I would love to do it again. I'd love to continue to do it. It's so much fun creating and being around creative people that like to just express themselves through art. It's a lot of fun.
I've never seen you in fur, but I'm sure it would be a good look.
Yeah, I think so.
On you. Well, anything you've done, this is really the final thing, but, can you just give us some good Netflix recommendations? You've been locked in for a lot of time. Anything lately that you recommend that's worth checking out?
Oh, man. Well, we do. I have been known to dabble in the Netflix, Amazon Prime kind of realm. I'm going to go back to, I think you've watched this show. I know you have. I've watched a couple episodes with you, but Brooklyn Nine-Nine is a very lighthearted show. It's if you're looking to get, although it may be canceled now, I don't know, it's about police officers, so maybe it's not going to be around. Watch it while you can. It's very lighthearted to get your mind off of everything that's going on in the world. It's real easy comedy, real easy 22-minute episodes to watch before you go to sleep or to wind down after work. Kind of lift your spirits up a little bit.
I like Brooklyn. I've seen a lot of those on the airplane because they're like, hey, we're landing in 20 minutes. I got time for one more. And
yeah,
I like Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And every time I watch King of Queens, Jake, I think that, and I'm watching a combination of you and me and the great Kevin James character. I love still being entertained by these great comedic actors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, King of Queens is definitely one of my favorites too. All those old ones. King of Queens I used to watch with my dad every night before we went to bed and stuff. So that one's pretty close to my heart.
Well, we finished that Milan Film Festival, Jake, 10 years ago at an awards banquet, and we sat there in a beautiful theater and a very formal night, and nobody had cued us. We were completely unaware of what was coming. And that night they got to the best picture of the festival category, and they called our names. And the three of us walked up on that stage and smiled and took photos and held a kind of interesting European-looking glass trophy. And flew home thinking, man, we actually had created something worthwhile. We had been validated in a way, and that was a precious memory.
Yeah, it sure was. Everything about that trip. I mean, the winning the best film over there was just icing on the cake. But even the walk through some of the biblical times back then, when we went to the Catacombs of Domatilla, and were able to see where they held worship and where their dead were buried from the religious crusades, and just an amazing experience that really, not only culturally but emotionally, everything about that trip was fantastic.
Wow, I forgot about that. I'm glad you mentioned that. I had visited the Catacombs of Domatilla 10 years prior on my first trip to Rome. They sit outside the city walls, and so many Christians had been murdered and massacred in the first 3 centuries in Rome, for sport, at the Circus Maximus, by the gladiators, but just in general. And I remember visiting those catacombs and thinking to myself, what Roman citizen would in their right mind ever trade in all the benefits of being a Roman citizen and become a follower of the way, a follower of Jesus, when it could cost them this? And it occurred to me the only reason was that it was real, that they felt the real presence of the Holy Spirit. They had a sense of the real living God, and that even the glories of the Roman culture couldn't overshadow that. And I think, today, just as you brought that up, I did want to bring you and Brian there that day. And of all the things we could have visited, that was one of the ones I wanted to make sure we saw.
Right. Those are the true. I mean, we were talking today about the heroes that are giving their lives and sacrificing their lives. Those people are the ones that need to be praised as heroes. That was certain death back then. That wasn't probable death. That was certain death. And it still goes on today in the Middle East and all around the world. But the people that knew that if they were caught out in public and were found out to be followers of Christ, it was just open execution. Those people that still didn't give up on that, those people are the ones that need to be praised as heroes.
Well, and they will be by the Lord, and He has said in His Word that the world wasn't worthy of them. And it's a tough lesson, but it's part of the Bible, that there's a glory awaiting those who suffer for Christ. Jake, thanks for being on the podcast today. It's great to see you, and just God bless you and protect you in the work that you do, and all of your brothers and sisters in the department. Might you be safe and effective. Jake Boyce, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Have no shame, no, we are not afraid, no shame of the gospel of His name. It's the power of God by which we all are saved. We need not be afraid.
No Shame is a weekly podcast where John Grooters discusses life at the intersection of faith and culture with all kinds of interesting and inspiring guests. Subscribe to the podcast today by going to johngrooters.com, select the podcast tab, and hit subscribe. Don't miss any of these life-giving conversations.